Welcome to Mortified, the Friendship Quest, a podcast where two Twitter friends recommend media in the hopes the other will like it. This week, I, Aaron, who definitely wrote this intro, continue to test Leyla's ADHD brain and her capability to really buckle down and eat a 500-page book in 2 sittings. I'm the aforementioned Aaron.
And I'm Leyla.
And before we get into the crux of our show, I would just like to point out that our audio might be bad because both of us have police helicopters flying over our apartments. It is when we're recording this May 31st, 2020. And, you know, it's not really the point of our show, but I would just like to say we do want justice for George Floyd, that Black Lives Matter, and maybe our police departments shouldn't have goddamn helicopters.
Yeah, again, not to get into this too deep, but one, property is never going to be worth as much as a human life. And two, I moved to Texas about 3 years and some change ago. And I noticed, one of the funny things I noticed when I first moved, and you can feel free to cut this out. I'm just kind of telling you as my friend.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the funny things I noticed when I first moved to Texas was that all the cop cars were really old Fords. Mm-hmm. And in the last 3 years, all of a sudden, it's like brand new SUVs. I saw a Mustang with the police. We have tanks rolling through because we're never too far from an army base. And the funny thing is about Austin is that the more time goes on, the closer oil rigs creep to our city. For example, there's one about 6 miles away from my house on the way to my best friend's house. So fun fact, if that one was to go up in flames, it would cut Austin off from the east side of an entire highway that is the only highway to get to the east side of Texas.
Yeah, good. It's good. We love that. We love to live in the world. Anyway, we are, this week we're talking about Crow Saga by Paul Krueger. And it will have something to do with talking about the consequences of violence and how we deal in a violent world. So let me. Do you want to summarize it?
Yeah. So Crow Saga is what I would describe as a multi-narrator fantasy romp that reminds me of a mix of R.F. Kuang's Poppy War and I wrote in the outline Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I think Korra is the closer bet. And it's about this multinational quest to return Iron Prince Jimuro to his throne in order for heads of state to continue their power struggle, but maybe without outright wars and violence. Maybe. So yeah, it's this. There's 4 or 5 points of view that we touch on. And it is 3 converging storylines, and I was talking to a friend about this book earlier, and I described the 3 storylines as like the Tala, who is a soldier, and Jimuro, who is the prince, them trying to get to Hagane, which is the capital city of fantasy Japan, and to get Jimuro coronated. Then there are the lesbians with the dog, so Julan and Lee with their dog, who is formerly Jimuro's dog, which I thought was cool as hell. They're also heading to Hagane, but to kidnap Jimuro so that Julan could get favor with her father, the Crane Emperor, in fantasy China?
Yes.
Essentially,
yes,
right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, fantasy China. And then there is this third storyline that I'm going to call Jimuro versus the world, which is just these external factors that keep popping into his life. So like a former friend and the steel cicadas, and which is, depending on whose point of view you're talking about, is either a terrorist group or a group of nationalist saviors, I guess. And a bunch of like assassinations and attempts on people's lives, and this mysterious quote unquote splinter soul, which is in terms of the magic of the world, where you can either metal pact, which is kind of channeling your soul into metal, which is what the fantasy Japan practices, versus shade pacting, which is binding your soul to an animal, which is seen as quote unquote slavery by fantasy Japan. And when you're a splinter soul, you're binding your soul to multiple animals, and it's like unheard of, and it's a whole thing. Is that there's a lot happening in this book. Was that pretty good?
Yeah, I mean, you got all the major points. I'm proud. I especially like that you noticed that, there's basically 4 fantasy nations going on here. There's I think there's 4. There's Fantasy Japan, obviously, which is Tomoda. There's Shang, which is Fantasy China. There's the Fantasy, I believe it's the Philippines, which is where Tala is from. I don't remember what that country is called.
That would make sense because the author is half Filipino.
Yeah. And then there's another one, which is I want to say like maybe Taiwan. It's probably Fantasy Taiwan now that I think about it. Because
are you talking about which one?
Because what's her name? The dog lesbian, the thief, Lee, right? Lee's the thief.
Mm-hmm.
Thief. She is from like Jeonsong, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
I think that's the city. I don't remember what the country, or is it? No, it is the country.
Yeah,
I think it is Johnson. Yeah,
and that they have like an adversarial relationship with Fantasy China, which makes me think that it's Fantasy Taiwan. I haven't seen Krueger talk about it specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
I would make an Sorry, keep going.
There's also a Fantasy India, but they don't play as big of a role. But don't worry about them.
Yeah, I wanted to get your feelings on that because.
Okay, well, since you asked, I like the way that Krueger portrays Fantasy India, except for the part where they're all like greedy merchants. That's not great. That kind of bummed me out, but I do like this book so much that I'll criticize it for that, but it's not gonna kill my enjoyment of the book.
Well, do you want to elaborate on, just give a little bit of background on like the pronoun stuff and like what you mean by the fact that they're all greedy merchants, like the extent to which it goes?
I mean, I haven't read the book in a couple months, but basically like the way that the Fantasy India nation works is like you have to buy the right to use the first person. Otherwise, you have to use like when you ever used to say like I think this, you have to say this one thinks this, and like only really wealthy or noble people can say I, which is an interesting thing. But because it does map directly onto like India, and I mean they when they talk about the various rebellions, they're named after flowers, and this particular country uses the lotus, which is like India's national symbol. So you know, it's not ideal. I don't love it because especially the Indians. I mean, all the fantasy nations come together at the end for a cool final fight, but for a long part, the Indian people are like kind of the bad guys. But to be fair, you know, all of them are kind of the bad guys because Krueger is very conscious of imperialism and the fact that like all states are kind of terrible.
Well, I think it's interesting, right? I had a little bit of beef with the way Fantasy India was portrayed too. I mean, obviously not from the same point of view that you did, but yeah. So for every other country that we encounter, we get to encounter somebody from the ruling class and then somebody from the populace, right? Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of interacting with the Tomodanese people. We do a lot of interacting with some Sambusa, which is fantasy... What do we say?
I think
it was?
those
Fantasy
are the Philippines. Yes. Sanbu,
yes,
Sanbu is the Fantasy Philippines. Okay.
And then we never meet an official from Gyeongsam, but that's probably because there's not really one.
No, because they're like governed by the Chinese or the Shang.
Yeah, and then we do, so we do a lot of interacting with all kind of with 2 levels of people in those areas, but when we went to Fantasy India for a second, or the area that Fantasy India occupies within Tomoda, we only got to meet ruling class assholes.
Yeah, we don't meet any nice people.
It really kind of painted the whole thing with a broad brush, because not only are they painted as like incredibly mercantile and I would say subservient to capitalism in a really creepy way.
Yeah.
Because it got so specific as for the what was his name? For the guy that we met.
There's like Chetan Parkash is the name.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking of. Mm-hmm. So Chetan Parkash is the first person we meet, and Julan is the fantasy Chinese princess. She's 28th in line for the throne. This whole quest is about her gaining favor with her father, who was the emperor, the Crane Emperor. Mm-hmm. And her whole thing is that she's very knowledgeable about all of the ruling class, and she takes Lee, a thief, on as her partner because Lee has street smarts, and together they make one whole brain cell. Mm-hmm. They don't, but that's the idea. They make one whole lesbian,
Mm-hmm.
is what they make. But Julan says something to... The quote I'm thinking of is when they meet at the dock, and she says to Chetan Prakash that she insinuates that he's really close to getting the singular pronoun, and he says in response, yes, if his second quarter earnings are as good as his first quarter.
Oh, yeah.
That was wild to me. I do just want to get like all the negatives out of the way so we can talk about the genuine like glee with which I read most of this book, but
Yeah.
I think that's important to address that.
Yeah.
I wasn't a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
I also wasn't a huge fan of, there's a trans man named Kosuke in this book, which I'm always jazzed to see trans characters treated well, and I'm going to say Mr. Krueger, in my cis woman opinion, did a pretty good job, except for one scene that I just wasn't sure was necessary, and in talking to a friend of mine, I'm kind of getting the vibe that it truly wasn't, but it's when Kosuke is a friend of the prince, a childhood friend of the prince, and they sleep together because Jimuro gets mad.
Yeah.
So
he's mad at Tala,
goes...
so he fucks Kosuke, yeah.
It was so petty. Anyway, he's a petty boy. But Tala walks in on them in the morning, and like her whole thing is she doesn't give a shit, and when she's looking at Kosuke naked,
he's like binding himself, right?
Yeah, he's binding himself, and she notices he doesn't have any like battle scars, even though he claims to be a warrior, and that's what she's like scrutinizing.
Yeah.
And he turns around and like throws his arms open and is like, "Do you despise this form, you savage?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, I didn't need that. We already went over the fact that he's trans when Jimuro got to do surprise Pikachu face.
Yeah.
At his friend not.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were the two parts about this book that I was like, oh.
I mean, for what the way I read it was that like Krueger wanted an excuse to be like, no, the transphobia doesn't really exist in this world. That's why nobody was surprised by it. But like, I do understand that it's not a perfect representation.
It's like, but I do appreciate the energy that it brought, which is the same as the Saints Row franchise, which. If you don't know, Saints Row 1, you can only play as a man. Saints Row 2 through 4, you can play as a woman, and you can switch back and forth as much as you want. Like, you get the character creator in the beginning of each game, even if you carry over a save.
Cool.
And the only comment that anybody makes is, did you do something different with your hair? Like, that's it.
There you go. Yeah.
So I do enjoy it. Okay. I have questions for you.
Okay, yeah, no, let's hear them.
We've gone over... the gist, we've gone over the issues, so let's really get into the meat here. So you previously said this was your second favorite book of last year. I want to know, what about it, one, spoke to you, and two, why did Poppy War edge it out?
The reason that I loved this book was because, like you said, you compared it to Korra. I mean, the author himself explicitly compares it to Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Pokemon. He's like, I was having difficulty selling books that I was trying to write for the market, so I just wanted to write something that was 100% for me. And then he wrote Avatar meets Pokemon in Fantasy Asia, and it became a huge hit for him. And I love that. I love that aesthetic. I mean, I've talked about how much I love Pokemon and anime, so like this this book was extremely my shit. I loved it quite a bit. The reason that it didn't quite click for me as much as Poppy War and not the Burning God, that's the third one, Dragon Republic, was I think it's just because I liked the military shit in the Dragon Republic more. I liked how they talked about like troop movements and strategy, and there were more like military style battles as opposed to like, this was a very anime book. So it was less like historical fiction and more just like anime. And that's not necessarily to say that I didn't like Steel Crow Saga. It's just that I'm a big fucking dork and I love like military history and weird shit like that because I'm a dweeb. Besides that though, I think that, for what it's worth, Krueger does a lot of work to make sure that his characters stand out and have distinct, noticeable like signifiers. Like every character has something. Like the Jimuro has his glasses, Tala has has Beaky, the bird, Julan has her her pipe, and Lee has what does Lee have? I mean, she has a dog for one, but I feel like she has something else. But like he went back and like because he explicitly wanted fan art is what he said on Twitter. So he made every person have like their own little signifier. That's why everybody has like a shade pact mark, which is another thing that sets out a character, sets a character apart from another one. They all have visual signifiers. So I do think that in a lot of ways SCS is stronger in its characterization than Poppy War and Burning, or not Burning God, Dragon Republic. There's just like a lot of characters in those ones, especially once you get into Rin and the Psyche. Like there's just a lot of Psyche characters that sort of fall by the wayside because Rin is just wasting them left and right. And we'll talk if we keep doing this in podcast until the Burning God comes out. We'll talk about the Burning God, and that'll be some good shit. But yeah, I do think that SCS does a great job with characters.
That shit comes out a week after my birthday. Like, I don't know.
Oh boy.
I don't know. Like, just but anyway, yeah, read Poppy War and Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. So good.
She rules.
Why are we both forgetting the name of the second book?
It's the second book. It's hard to remember.
It's true. Okay, so my second question was about what properties this book was referencing, and I mean you covered it, ATLA and Pokemon. Mm-hmm. I want to elaborate on that though. Do you think Paul Krueger brought anything like a new, hot, fresh take to those two franchises?
Oh yeah, definitely. Pokemon is a children's franchise for babies, and I love it. But there's a lot of artifice that goes around the art of Pokemon being like, oh, when they fight, they love it actually, and they don't mind being stuck in the computer for forever, and oh, they fainted when they do horrible battle damage to each other, right? In this one, it's very much like, oh, these animals are hurting each other and killing people, and they're like murder monsters. It's like it's a little more gritty, realistic version of what Pokemon would be. It's not edgy certainly, but it is a little bit more fantasy realism than just like, oh, Gyarados used Hyper Beam and your Pidgey fainted, and isn't just like a fucking pile of ashes on the ground. And as far as like Avatar does do a lot of like it hints at, I mean not hints at, I mean colonialism and imperialism is like a main theme throughout that show. And I think Krueger, applies it specifically to post World War II Japan, and he grounds it a little. I mean, that's also what the Fire Nation was based on, but like he grounds it a little bit more. He adds the extra historical context. He makes it seem like there were consequences for a revolution. That's specifically the consequences is what Steel Crow Saga is interested in, because it's not the fighting of the revolution, which is what Avatar is. It's about what happens afterwards. Because you start the book with like a 10-year time skip, because at the beginning it's like, oh, okay, we are in this occupied land, and then by chapter 1 the war is already over, and the whole thing of Steel Crow Saga is telling the story of the war and like what happened and how people are going to fix it, because everybody has a lot of big feelings about being conquered and killing each other and each country's and culture's values. And I think that's what Krueger brings into it that's so interesting. He shows you from each national's perspective, like, hey, this is why we believe this thing, this is why we don't believe this thing, this is why, like with the shade pacting, the Pokemon, like the Fantasy Japan is like, oh, those are slaves, you guys are doing slave labor, and everybody else is like, no, these are our friends, we're working together, and you can make an argument for both sides. That's what we like to do on this podcast. We love to argue for both sides. Yeah, does that about answer it?
Yeah, no, that's good. I do especially like the emphasis that Pokemon is a show for babies.
I love Pokemon. I've put hundreds of hours into every Pokemon game, but it is a child's thing for little idiots like me.
It's a delightful, simple-minded concept. So in terms of the, I just wanted to touch on the narrative structure a little bit. So I personally, like you just brought up that 10-year time skip. First of all, I want you to know in the first 80 pages of the book, I was so pissed because the opening, the prologue, is from the point of view of a character named Dimangan, or Mang, as he is, or Mong, I guess, as he is referred to as through the rest of the book by Tala. He is Tala's older brother. And in the prologue, you find out pages after the prologue is over that Mong is dead. And another book that I love, hate, does the same thing. It opens with a character who is just like not relevant, and it gives me his point of view for no reason. But then Paul Krueger does this tasty little thing that we have not touched on yet. And we find out that no, this is relevant because Tala does a Full Metal Alchemist taboo and binds pacts with her brother. So she is also a fucking Splinter Soul who has a person and a crow in her head all the time. It is.
She turns her brother into a Pokemon, which is pretty fucked up.
It is the tastiest payoff, though.
It's incredible,
for something that I was just like genuinely concerned was just gonna fizzle out for no reason. No, it was delicious, and we get Monk's point of view a couple more times throughout the book. And he's an interesting character because he only pops out every once in a while, so he's just confused most of the time when he first comes out.
Confused and mad.
It's just an angry boy. But yeah, him and Tala are really funny, and I think it deals really nicely with the physical consequences of Mong being a big taboo, because they're in pain every time he comes out.
Yeah.
Which I thought that was really tasty. Like, kudos Paul Krueger. I did not see that coming. I'm gonna go ahead and say I did not see most of this book coming. He kept me on my toesies.
Yeah.
And I'm usually pretty good at guessing what's gonna happen. I had like 80 pages in the book left and shit was going down, and I was like, I have no idea how this is gonna resolve. Like, I lost. So going back to the question I had for you, what is your opinion on how do you feel about like multiple narrators and like using that storytelling style?
So I think you have to think about it from the point of view of somebody trying to write a story with multiple narrators, because in my limited writing forays, the only time I've ever used multiple narrators is in fan fiction, and like it's very difficult to like, if you keep a story restrained to one person's point of view, I think it's difficult to get characterization for other characters. I feel like it's much easier to like tell people just like, hey, this is what this character's feeling, because you're in their head. And like that's something I wish I could do as a writer, is like be able to switch seamlessly between characters, and I think it's very impressive. So I like the way that he switches between characters, and you also get a distinct personality and flavor for each one, because he does again want to make those characters so distinct and unique. So I did love the way that he handled all these characters, because there's like, I mean, you get 5 different perspectives with including Mong, so he does a really good job of showing and characterizing his main actors in this, and I thought it was well done. I mean, unfortunately I haven't been reading a lot. Things have been rough in the world, and I can't concentrate. But like, yeah, I haven't read a lot of, like, there have been some stories that it's just like, I don't know who you are, I don't get it. But I think because of the intentionality that Krueger put into his characterization and making sure these people are distinct, I think that went a long way to making sure that this was a good use of multiple narratives.
Right. I'm of two minds about it, right? So, the reason I wanted to ask you about this is because I've read a bunch of books with multiple narrators, and it's hit or miss for me.
Yeah.
It's just like not the way I think about storytelling, but when it's done well, it's done well. My beef with, I wouldn't even call it a beef. My chicken tender with the multiple narrators in this story is that Mr. Krueger has this habit that made me want to die, and it is to die in a good way. He will present me a conflict, and at the peak of the conflict, he will switch points of view, and then it's like 3 hours beforehand. So
he does do that a couple times.
The best example of that for me is when Jimuro and Julan are on the train and Kosuke is losing his entire shit, being a terrorist.
Yeah.
And then after him and Tala have a fight, she goes off and she comes back in the nick of time. And as soon as we get the mental image of her hand gripping the door and like opening it and it's her, he goes back to like Tala and Jimuro talking in the woods, and it literally drove me fucking crazy. So like, I don't know, did that bother you, just like the non-linearity of that at all?
I mean, I do, as a simple man, hate when any story isn't presented in a simple and straightforward way. But I think he did it justice, because when he jumped back through, especially with Jimuro and his memories, I think he did a good job making sure that you could like tell. I mean, he used italics to be like, hey, this is in the past or whatever. And I mean, that is a writing technique to help keep people like hooked and interested in reading the story. So you know, maybe it is a bit of a parlor trick, but I didn't really notice it because I was just so busy tearing through this book. When I read this book, it was like maybe a month after it came out, and I was like at work and I was just reading it on my phone. So that's I was able to like get through it really fast.
Yeah, I mean, I ripped through it in two sittings, and it truly was. I didn't have to like grit through it at all. I chugged as long as my eyes were open. I was reading.
Yeah.
Okay, and then before we get into characters, I shall one last question. It's an easy one. What was your favorite part? I just want to know, like, what were your favorite scenes?
Oh, my favorite part of Steel Crow Saga. I think it's got to be the point where so there's this purple man, the Splinter Soul, who's hunting Jimuro, and like through the first whole half of the book, it's like, this Splinter Soul's coming to kill me. He killed all of Tala's platoon, and he's trying to hunt down Jimuro, and he can't be stopped because he has 30 Pokemon, and you're only supposed to have one in your heart. And even though Tala has two, and one of which is her hybrid monster brother, you know, she can't stop him. So they're on this train that you just said that his trans boyfriend hijacked, and Jimiro's like, okay, I'm gonna face this dude down. I'm gonna take him down once and for all. He wants me. So he like, I think he detach the car.
Yes.
Yeah, he's like, all right, it's just gonna be me. So he like splits the train in half. He splits his half away from the engine with all his friends in it, and then they're like, no, what are you doing? And he's like, all right, I'm ready to face you. And the purple man just sort of just like walks past him. He's like, wait, what? Hey, wait, I'm right. Oh no, this isn't about me at all. It's so good. And then Krueger has talked about how he thinks that heroic last stands are sort of horseshit. So it's like a great example of like, oh yeah, your heroic last stand was actually bullshit, dummy. You didn't do anything. You have to walk now.
We talked about this a little bit over DM, and I think Krueger does this really funny thing, which is like occasionally his characters will do the equivalent of like the Judi Dench breaking the fourth wall at the end of Cats and lecturing the audience. And like there's one part where Jimuro and Lee are driving in a car, and which the cars in this are fucking sick. They're powered by metal packaging, and I think that's dope as shit. Mm-hmm. But they're driving, and Jimuro literally does the equivalent of turning to the audience and going, "You should use your fucking blinkers."
It's pretty good.
It's fucking extremely good.
There's a couple times where Krueger's just like, hey, don't be shitty.
Use your blinkers. My favorite part was also on the train, and it was the part where Julan gets locked in a freezer and starts talking to a box of mushrooms.
The mushrooms are so good. Her like constant haunting by fungi is really funny.
She hates mushrooms so much. But where's the it's just 3 times this happens. She goes, a groan gained power in her throat, rising until it was a pure primal growl of frustration. She unleashed it, leaving her formidable vocabulary by the wayside. Everything she had was in that growl, reached from so deep inside her that it brought tears to her eyes just to let it out. But even as she vented all her fury and frustration, she felt the refrigerator wall stifling her voice like a glass placed over a candle flame. She glared tearfully at the crate's label. I was so close, she whispered to it with a shaking voice. Cheerfully, the crate replied, mushrooms. Like, it's just incredible. It's my... speaking of incredible things, let's talk about the characters. This is very important to me. Mm-hmm. So, Aaron and I are learning a lot about each other in this endeavor.
That's
we're learning.
true.
We're learning a lot about our brands. We're learning a lot about each other. We're interrogating some deep questions. And Aaron has posed this question to me yesterday. Why with you is it this thing is fucking terrible, but I love it? And I have an answer for that. I don't fucking know. I've been trying to interrogate it for literally days. I'm like, why do I love shitty things? And I think part of it is that I'm not intimidated by shitty things and characters, and the other part of it is that I am more engaged with media and with characters that are, I think in terms of media, it's easy for me to engage with something that I feel like I can like have an input on in terms of like fixing it in fan fiction or like making up my own headcanon and like catering the story more to myself. And then in terms of characters, I just love a project. So in the beginning of this book, I DM'd Aaron and I said, I love Prince Jamuro. He fucking sucks. And then Aaron's response made it sound like he was going to get shittier. And then I came back and I said, fuck Prince Jamuro. I'm pro this dog that the lesbians have, which is true. I love Bootstrap more than anything I've ever loved. And then by the end of the book, I'm gonna fucking say it, I still love Prince Jamuro. He sucks. But he sucks in such a benign way, and I grade him on what I'm gonna call the Nezha curve. Nezha being a character from
the aforementioned Poppy War. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Nezha starts out sucking really bad, and then he sucks a lot less, and then he kind of sucks super bad, and I have a feeling he's going to continue sucking till his death, which is coming, I'm assuming, very soon. And how do I put this? I was waiting for him. Spoiler for the Dragon Republic. Skip 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. I was waiting for him to stab Tala.
Yeah.
Literally. Like, Nezha level, stab her.
In the back, yeah.
And he didn't, which means he got elevated, in my eyes, to a baby. And it was like, oh, you can't. This is not that book. This is not the book where you're going to stab someone so I can enjoy you being shitty. So what I'm trying to say is my ranking right now is like Bootstrap number 1, Bootstrap Angel. Then Jamuro, because again, he sucks and I love him. He reminds me of like Howl, if Howl had a guilty conscience and any responsibility towards other people. And then I want to say Shulan. Close behind Shulan is Lee. And I never know how to feel about Tala. I like Tala by association with Jamuro, but like everyone else, I just like a touch more. I don't dislike any of the characters, but that's the ranking in which I like them.
Yeah.
How did they make you feel, these people?
I agree with your assessment of Tala because I think Tala is the most like traditional protagonist of the whole group of them. I mean, she there's like one big problem she has in her past, and that's sort of her driving force. But like she's all in all like kind of a generic like I'm a person who's like really cool and strong, but like my main thing is like just getting the mission done. And that's not like necessarily criticism. I just think she's not as interesting as Julan, whose whole thing is like, I want to become princess, even though, or I guess queen, even though it's like a super long shot, and my evil sister is the one thing holding me back. And also I'm like a weird detective, and also I'm like a big dork. I thought Julan's my favorite out of all the main four. I think she rules.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me at all.
That's unfortunate.
Considering Shulan's whole chain of thinking is like, she always compares extreme situations to these like detective novels she read.
Yeah.
I feel like that's on brand for you.
Oh, good. Great. That makes me feel good. Yeah, Julan's my favorite. Second, probably to Jamuro, just because I think he's an interesting character, and I like the notion of like a guy who is burdened with the responsibility of healing his parents, like the bad things his mom did, as far as like being an imperialist like leader, and like the trying to grapple with that tension of like, how do I care for my quote unquote people as opposed to like caring for all these different kinds of people I met. I think that Jamuro's whole motivations are very interesting. And Lee, I mean, I think I think Lee's actually interesting now that I remember. Her whole thing is just like, I betray you before you betray me, which is like a pretty good catchphrase. But beyond that, she is just sort of like a general like a rogue. She's like, hey, I gotta steal, I gotta do all those bad people things, but I have a heart of gold. And again, that's not to say that I don't like any of these characters. I think they're all great. I just think, if you're ranking them, I'm always gonna have a soft spot for a big nerd who is trying to achieve power.
Yeah, that's on brand. I thought Shulan had the best aesthetic, and like
Oh, yeah.
you've mentioned a couple of times that this book is like, it's like reading an anime.
Yeah, that's
and
intentional.
Shulan is oh god, I hope so. Julan is like the best example of that, because her whole thing is she has like a bang. She has always got one eye covered because that's where her pact mark is, and she's always smoking a pipe and always wearing all white. So she's just like straight up such an anime character.
Yeah,
and I loved it. I loved it so incredibly much. But yeah, I agree with you about Tala. Like, she's fine. I thought she was more interesting as a kid, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, because she has that weird like little 10-year-old thing of like being kind of a little shit, but also knowing what's going on and being like outspoken and like funny. But yeah, on the whole, I do think that Krueger does a great job with these characters. So how do you feel about this story's main like theme of redemption and like trying to come together as far as like forgiveness for essentially war crimes goes?
So it's actually okay. So I was mostly interested in hearing what you had to say about this, because back when we talked about Imagine Dragons of all things, I think we had a pretty good conversation that I think alluded to both of us having been pretty like upright, upstanding children, very like rigidly raised, and there's a lot in this book about redemption, and especially with like Lee being kind of a devil may care criminal. So I was just wondering, I guess I really wanted to get your thoughts on like, especially like Jimuro and Tala have to deal a lot with reconciling people's expectations of them with their own intentions, what they actually want, with Jimuro especially, who's like very reluctant to take the throne for a little while. So I don't know, like how did that make you feel? Like, did you foster any like particular connection to any of them? Did it remind you of maybe a time when, I don't know, you were a teen and things feel like war crime level issues that you had to deal with, and where maybe you struggled or needed forgiveness or said something, or did it speak to you in any way? That was my extremely long-winded way of saying that.
I mean, I don't think I connected with any of the characters on like a personal level. I think their kind of struggles are a little bit above where I go in my life. Like, now if this had been set in a school, then maybe we could talk about grades and homework and the AP bubble. But yeah, I didn't think they were like relatable to me personally. I mean, I did get the tension between Tala and Mang, specifically, the tension between an older brother and a younger sister. As somebody who does have a little sister, I did like their dynamic, and I thought they were pretty convincing siblings. Yeah, but to answer your question, no, I didn't have that kind of connection. But did you have something similar in response to this book?
It's like, it's hard to say, right? Because the whole point of telling stories is to get people to connect to them. And I mean, like you said, we're neither princes nor criminals, either of us, unless you count, please FBI don't arrest me, but like some light music pirating between the years of like 2007 to 2010.
Okay, but that was required to get music.
That's true. Spotify has eliminated that need for me now. But I grew up with this like delusion of grandeur, I guess, where there was a lot of pressure on me to be the best at everything all the time. And I think part of the reason I like Jimuro so much is that desire to see yourself as only what you can give to other people, and being reluctant to take on any pressure, and then also balancing your personal needs and desires with what is expected of you in terms of other people. I really resonated, I think, with that in his, like, quest. And not that it answered any personal questions for me. Like, it wasn't like She-Ra, where, spoilers for season 5 of She-Ra, where Mara puts her fucking hands on Adora's shoulders and is like, you are more than what you could give to others, and I burst into fucking tears like a baby. Yeah, I feel like there was something in it for me as somebody who feels guilty about literally everything all the time. So in the beginning, you and I want to use this as a segue. In the beginning, you and I were talking a little bit about the state of the world that we live in, that we occupy currently and right now.
Yeah.
I don't know about your family, but I know that in mine, there are some people who are of a mind, about what is happening right now. Mm-hmm. And we are always going to live in a community with people who maybe were officers of the law or are officers of the law. We're always going to we always have to share our community with people, not only with whom we disagree with, but maybe who did things that are morally reprehensible. Mm-hmm. This is a book about war crimes. The Poppy War that we keep bringing up, that's a book about worse war crimes somehow.
Yeah.
This is war crimes light. Mm-hmm. Poppy War is the diary of a war crime. Did any of these characters do enough in your eyes to redeem themselves? When are you redeemed enough? When have you done enough?
I mean, that's the thing when you're talking about, especially with war crimes, is that, well, it's never really enough, right? You can't have adequate restitution for, the taking of a human life, let alone the taking of 1,000 human lives. Let alone the systematic oppression and exploitation of an entire, generation or race or country of people, right? There's no such thing as enough when it comes to the way that we do reparations to other people, right? There can only be, like, something. There can only be, like, I'm trying and I'm gonna keep trying. Because, there's nothing else we can do, right? We talk about this sort of thing. Specifically, when I was reading Inglorious Empire, which is a book about the way that India was colonized by the British, right? The author, who is a Carolyn MP, talked about how he has argued for British reparations in the form of, like, a pound for every year that Britain occupied India, which would be, like, I don't know, like 200 pounds, right? Which is nothing, right? But it is the symbolism of that has meaning. It is the way of saying, like, from one government to another, we acknowledge what we did was wrong and we're sorry. And I mean, I personally don't think that's probably enough. I think they should probably give our fucking jewels back, but that's a different story. But, like, that's the thing. I think that with Jimuro, right? Jimuro I don't remember if he did anything specifically at the end besides promising, like, he wanted to, as the Steel Lord, create, like, some sort of new world, and he wasn't going to try to regain Tomoda's rule, but he also wasn't going to roll over for the rest of them. Like, I don't know that he actually did anything concrete, right? I don't know that Tala, talking about all the people she killed, I don't know that her quest to regain stability and prevent another war necessarily makes up for the fact that she, as a soldier, you do things that are unforgivable to various people. I mean, she turned her own brother into a Pokemon, and they talk about in that movie, or not that movie, this book, about how, like, that act was, even though it was done by a child, is in some way a selfish act, because she just didn't want to cope with the fact that she would be the only member of her family left alive. I think the best person who can describe this is Lee in her way of the way that she talks about how the Shang and the Tomoda, the way that they treated her people, and she's like, I don't really care about how either of these people, I don't really side with one country or the other because they both treated us like shit. I think she gets at it. So, I don't know that. I know this story is trying to be about like what it means to grapple with the consequences of imperialism and war crimes. I don't know that we see enough of it, in the world building, which, is fair. I think that would have been kind of a weird, epilogue to be like, hey, anyway, this is what Jimuro did specifically to make it better. But I do think that Krueger gets at the heart of the issue, which is like, there isn't really anything we can do to make up for the suffering that we've caused others. We just have to do it and keep doing it and put in the work and be serious about it. And never stop doing the work, even when we feel like it's enough. It's probably not, because there will be consequences to our actions that we cannot really comprehend, for generations down. Is that anything?
I'm 100% on the same page. Like, I think you said it all. Mm-hmm. It's, you just have to keep working. And I mean, just in terms of, let's talk about the Poppy War for like a second.
Yeah.
Because we keep bringing it up, and I think there's a lot of really apt comparisons.
Yep.
Like, just for some context, Rin, the main character in the Poppy War, she burns a country down.
Well, she essentially, what she does is she drops the nuke on Japan as opposed to America, except this time it's not just one nuke, she just sinks the whole island.
Yeah, it's tough to read. It's a
very gruesome book. It's a great book, but holy shit.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some atrocities in there. Like, there's and this is a trigger warning for very explicit violence, so if that bothers you, please just skip like 30 seconds ahead. But there's a portion in the book where a pregnant woman gets her stomach like clawed out that I like couldn't read.
Yeah,
I just couldn't read it. I had to, couldn't listen to it. I had it on audiobook. But in terms of like Rin, right, and in terms of Nezha, who, as we mentioned, not a good boy, did some stabbing.
Bad guy, yeah.
Yikes. At this point, I feel like R.F. Kuang has set it up that there's no way for these characters' arcs to end well and be satisfying. And by end well, I mean like there's no way anybody's gonna end up happy ever.
Like, yeah, that's not really her thing, at least in that trilogy.
So in that sense, just like in terms of narrative, in terms of when we talk about redemption, when redemption isn't possible, so like if you single-handedly nuke a fucking island, is there anything that's satisfying in that story? Does that story have to then end on not the character, but maybe on the greater fate of a nation in recovery? Like, where do you... What is the point of telling a story like that?
I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I think that for the Poppy War, it feels like in some ways it is a revenge fantasy, specifically against Japan for the atrocities they committed during the Sino Japanese War. I think that's the right way to call it. The war where Japan did a lot of terrible things to China in 1939. I think, even if the point of it is not to be like, hey, what would it be like if we were able to, punish Japan for what they did to us? I think the point is I think it's a way to articulate like what a different version of the future is, and like, right, Rebecca Kuang talks about how her whole trilogy is about the way that Rin becomes a monster. It's Mao Zedong, basically. It's if Mao Zedong was a woman that could shoot fire out of her eyes. And so, you have to take the author's intent, even though the author's dead. You have to sort of take that into account. So, but beyond that framing, I think that, when we do tell stories about atrocities and trying to make up for them, I think it is, in a way, it is a wish fulfillment. It is, trying to bring our imagination into a world. It's trying to see something that we'd like to see in our world, right? Not necessarily like to see, but try to imagine what our world would look like if we had people trying to do reparations, trying to change the course of history to make it a world where we reckon with the sins we've committed against each other. So I think is more of an exercise in imagination. Writing fantasy is, in a lot of ways, an act of faith, where you are just sort of putting your personal hopes and dreams into a Word document and hoping that other people will be like, oh, I also have those hopes and dreams. Let's, this is something that I wish was real. And I think that both the Poppy War and Steel Crow Saga get at that hope, which is like, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. I hope that other people think about it a lot too, and I hope that we can have a conversation about what it means to grapple with the unthinkable, even if there's really not a point beyond just like, let's think about this. Like, I don't think that either of these authors expected to inspire change by writing these books. I think they just wrote them because they are authors and they wanted to tell a story that was interesting to themselves.
Yeah. I don't think any. I think there's a false assumption among audiences that every story has to have like significance in a way. I agree with you that I don't think it has to. It could absolutely just be something that a story you want to tell yourself that other people may also want to hear. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't have to be a transformative culturally, especially considering like the democratization of information and the democratization of media. It's just hard for big transformative stories to reach a wide enough audience for them to be that kind of significant. The last time we got close was Game of Thrones, but the only thing Game of Thrones changed was people's minds on HBO's capacity to tell a really good story. Considering that didn't end well, in the sense that the writing was bad.
Yeah.
Woof, that's a whole other episode. But yeah, I think it's worth discussing because I really, really enjoyed this book. I really got a kick out of it. I thought it was for the most part really well paced. The characters were super interesting. I love like a high maintenance shitty boy. Like it's just, I don't know what it is about it. Like how Nezha, Jamur, like because they're non-threatening for the most part. So it just like their shittiness delights me. If I met them in real life, I don't know if I would feel that way.
I would assume not.
But as characters in fiction, they do delight me. It has a lot of the tropes I really enjoy. I have a feeling Mr. Krueger has some lesbian friends, just because the portrayal of lesbians moving way too fast and getting a dog together is... Lesbians, I love you, but you know I'm right. Jimuro being a disaster bisexual, correct? Like, it's all just... it's an excellent book, and I love it very much. And thank you for recommending it. But it's, it's one of those things where you do need to talk about the fact that this is an anime book about war crimes, even if it's war crimes light. And it is difficult to write something with this tone and have your characters be, one, interesting, and two, redeemable enough for people to still root for them, because I can't say I'm rooting for Rin anymore.
I mean, Rin is bad. I mean, she did do a genocide, and she's not that sorry about it.
No, she's not. I can't think of very many redeemable characters in that trilogy.
I respect that.
And the same goes. Yeah, the genocide.
No,
or
I don't. I don't respect genocide. You can quote me on that. I do respect R.F. Kuang's commitment to making every one of her characters unlikable, and also having an incredibly well-selling series. That's
it's incredible. And the same thing goes for S.A. Chakraborty, who I like what Dara is at this point.
Oh yeah, he sucks
like, what
too.
do you like? What do you do? Mad respect, like you said, for authors who can do that and still have us feel for these characters, because I think I have a feeling, a hunch, if you will, that characters like Nezha and Dara and Rin are going to come to some pretty ugly, untimely ends in the finales of these trilogies. And the thing is, I'm still going to feel bad about it. Like, I'm still going to be sad for these characters who are functionally irredeemable and do not deserve a happy life. It was thank you for indulging me in this conversation, because it is a... Oh my god, it says on the back, think Pokemon meets the Golden Compass. I could have just read the back of this fucking paperback. Oh, okay. Well, never do work yourself that a professional is willing to do for you. And in these cases, it is Kirkus and the New York Times. They could have done this for me. Anyway, thank you for indulging me in this conversation, because I know you really love this book, and honestly, I'm super jazzed about it. It's definitely, like... I don't know if it hit me well enough for it to be, like, one of my favorites, but for sure, like... I've recommended it to other people already that I think would dig it, and it's definitely gonna stay part of my, like, permanent library over here. But yeah, I'm sorry that I took this in such a serious direction, but, like, I follow R.F. Kwong on Twitter. It's hard to not think about the Poppy War.
Yeah, she's a good Twitter follow. You should also follow the author of Steel Crow Saga, Paul Krueger, at Not Like Freddy. That's his Twitter handle, which is very funny. He's a pretty good Twitter follow too.
Oh. No, I get it. Not like Freddy Krueger. That's funny.
Do you want to do plugs?
Yeah, did we have a more lighthearted note to end this on?
I don't know. That's a good point. I mean, it's a very funny book. It's just, we talked about the Poppy War, which sort of fucked it up. Oh, what's going on?
I have it. If you were going to pact with an animal, what would it be?
Oh, shit. Oh, no. Because they talk about how, like, it's a very class-based thing, like only the Imperials can pact with, like, rats. I think I would...
Cranes.
Or, like, white animals, sorry. I thought about this, too, when I was reading the book. I'm a big sucker for water-type Pokemon, but also that means I couldn't, like, do anything outside of the water, and I hate swimming. So, like, I think it would probably have to be something easy and mobile, like, maybe like an armadillo. I did want to see, there's an alternate universe where Lee packs with the murder chicken, and, like, that would be interesting. My dream though, if I didn't have to worry about the water, would be like some sort of like an eel, like an evil eel. That would be tight.
Ooh, that's an energy. And also I would like to argue that, yeah, maybe they can't do anything out of the water, but what's his face, purple coat guy, did bring a shark crashing down on everyone.
Yeah, that's not good. You can't just be like, Gyarados, I choose you. Crush Pikachu with your huge body. He did do it though. It wasn't. It's just not nice. It's not a nice thing to do to your friend that lives inside of you.
No, you're correct. To absolutely no one's surprise, I'm of the same mind, except I love swimming. Like, I would pick a water thing. To absolutely no one's surprise, I think... No, fuck it, I can have best of both worlds. I think I'd go with, like, a crane, or a heron, or, like, a crane. Like, if we're gonna forget about the class thing, for a second, just because this is my playground and I do what I fucking want to. Just because I love a big, long-necked drama bird. And, they go in the water a lot and go splish splash, and I enjoy that.
Definitely.
And long beak, go peck.
Yeah, so, also, whenever we, become super, rich and famous, we should definitely adapt this into an anime. Just putting that out there.
Oh, it would slap so hard. It would be such a good anime. Okay, plug time. So, you wanna go first this time?
Well, actually, wait, we do recommendations first, right?
Oh, we never have an order.
Yeah,
for
that's
these
fair.
things.
I mean, you can find me at AaronSXL on Twitter, where I talk about coronavirus, bad Indiana politics, and recently police brutality. That's good. If you follow me at Monster Factory Fanfic, I just posted a short guide to protesting and basic first aid if you are going to be going out and protesting. And you can follow me on YouTube at Aaron S, where I talk about I do this show, and I also talk about evangelical media with my friends who are ex-evangelicals. It's a good time.
Right, and I'm at LEYLSES on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, where I tweet. I do a lot of food blogging lately. I do a lot of cooking. I also have a comic, astralheartcomic.com, which is flamboyantly gay and about dealing with trauma. Actually, as I was reading this book, I kept looking at Jimuro and going, man, he reminds me too much of Lear. Like, this is wild. That's probably why I liked him so much. But, and I also have been tweeting a lot about police brutality. I am offering donation commissions, so if you donate $20 or more to any local bail fund or any Black-owned organization helping with the protest, if you send me a receipt with a timestamp to Leyla Ma'am Art, so Leyla M as in Mary, A M as in Mary, art at gmail.com. I will sketch you something. Just send me like a visual reference as well. Recommendations. I'm going to give you a choice because you did say that you're having trouble focusing on books. So...
No, I need a reason to read a book. We can do this.
I'm still going to give you a choice in case you can't do it. Okay. My primary recommendation is going to be Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, which we talked about over DM. I am thoroughly charmed by the characters. I think you will be too. We can have a discussion about multi-narrative storytelling again. That is my first recommendation. If you find yourself unable to make it through a full novel, I did send you a copy of Nimona by Noelle Stevenson, which you can just read for fun. It's a graphic novel. It's an absolute delight.
Let's do Six of Crows just because one of the people who actually organized a Steel Crow Saga reread back in, I want to say February. She was really, and she's a book blogger, and she really recommended Six of Crows. So I want to see if that's the case.
Yeah, hell yeah, Six of Crows. I'm excited for somebody to actually, for me to not be info dumping about these dumb children, but for somebody to actually know what I'm talking about when I say I love how stupid and terrible all of them are. Shall we? Do you have anything else before I quote us out?
Nope, that's it.
Her gaze slid over to the crate on which she lay, which chimed in once again with mushrooms.